Well, good morning and welcome to Elevenses. I'm Kevin Williams of Survival Skills Rider Training, and this is my twice weekly webcast. I hope we're not going to be afflicted with choppy audio like we were a week ago today. There were a few glitches there in the intro music, but I hope the audio is coming over clear and consistent now. Anyway, it's show number 350 today. It's Wednesday the 12th of July. It's a reasonably bright morning at the moment with some fluffy white clouds and some blue sky poking in between. Quite nice. What have I got for you today? Well, quite a lot again in the show. We have a story about a biker jailed for attempted murder of a rival motorbike gang member. The Minister says councils should remove low traffic neighbourhoods. Verge have adopted Tesla's NACS North American charging standard. Buell Super Cruiser is a new bike that fuses design and performance. Are Royal Enfield about to reveal a 750? And then we'll take a quick look at the camel rather than cool BMW CEO2 electric bike. And then finally, quite a long one today, today's discussion point, all following on from a court case in which the counsel for the defence sort of suggested that the rider was at least partly responsible for the accident by only having a single headlight. I'll be actually looking at whether or not I can find any evidence for the claims for twin headlights and whether there are in fact more effective day riding light patterns than single headlights or even twin headlights, come to that. So stay tuned for the next 30 plus minutes or so. Don't forget, if you have anything to say, any comments, any questions, do please drop me a line. Kevin has just looked in. Nice to see you, Kevin. How are you today? Right, so what have we got for you to kick off? Well, just a quick warning about the weather before we go anywhere else. It's Wimbledon fortnight, so I really don't think we ought to be surprised at some heavy thunderstorms. Now, despite my corner of London having escaped almost entirely without rain again, the garden really could do with a good water now. I know some other parts of the UK have been looking for some respite from the downpours which have been causing flooding. Apparently even here in London the House of Commons has been partly flooded because a glass roof collapsed. That doesn't look like a particularly good piece of design, does it? Hey, anyway. So the weather continues to be a mixed bag for the rest of this week as the weekend approaches. Things are settling down a little with sunshine and showers for the next 2 days, but wet and windy conditions are expected to sweep across most of the parts of the country on Friday. And then rain, I'm afraid, continues to affect the northern part of the country over the weekend, whilst other areas will see heavy showers, but also some brighter spells. So if you're planning a ride this weekend, I would recommend that you check your local forecast, and in particular keep an eye on those thunderstorms. Don't forget they can often be accompanied by some fairly strong downdrafts. Now, first piece of news for today, and this is that a 42-year-old serviceman has been jailed for attempting to murder a motorcyclist who was a member of a rival gang. Now, Barry Smith was apparently acting as a support driver for a group of Satan's slaves as they rode along the A7 near Selkirk up in the Scottish borders, and a fight broke out with members of a rival motorcycle club called the Tribe. Now, Smith apparently drove his vehicle into a motorcycle being ridden by Andrew Lamb. The High Court in Edinburgh heard the assault took place on July 24th, 2021, left Mr. Lamb bleeding on the ground and needing urgent medical attention. His vehicle was damaged from the collision and it was abandoned further down the road. The passing motorist who filmed the scene handed the footage to the police, and the police decided that they had enough evidence to prosecute. And on Monday afternoon, Smith, who denied any wrongdoing during his week-long trial, was found guilty on charges of attempted murder and breaching road traffic laws by failing to stop after striking Mr. Lamb. So he's been remanded in custody ahead of sentencing next week. Now, another piece of interesting news from a month ago, the government withdrew central funding for new low traffic neighbourhood schemes. Now, I didn't pick up on that one, but basically what it means is that if councils want to put these in, they have to find the cash to implement the scheme from their own budget. I think they were getting something like 90% or 95% of funding necessary. Now, this low TN fund, LTN, low traffic neighbourhood LTN funding scheme was introduced by the government with the goal of creating safer and healthier communities by restricting motorised traffic on residential streets, prioritising pedestrian, cyclist and public spaces, and by improving air qualities. And the funding, the central funding, was delivered during the COVID lockdown. And at the time there weren't many vehicles moving around, so in some ways it actually made some quite good sense. But of course, as we came out of lockdown, critics have started to say that the schemes are actually having the opposite effect. Now, many of these schemes were obviously rushed out through in 2020 and 2021, often without consultation or any apparent planning. And of course, when the traffic was dramatically down, they didn't work too badly. But critics say what's happening now is that drivers are having to bypass these restricted areas, which means longer journeys. They get caught in jams, all of which, of course, increases pollution. Now, there are various studies on whether they work or not. The results are typically inconclusive. If you look in some places, people say that traffic hasn't been displaced to other roads, go to others, and they'll say it definitely has. Anyway, so Mark Harper, who is the Secretary of State for Transport, has now said that schemes originally implemented during COVID to improve personal transport choices have become focused on making things more difficult for motorists, and of course by implication motorcyclists too, by banning cars. And he went further, and he has now suggested that local councils should actually remove the schemes that were instituted during COVID entirely. Okay, now don't forget, if you want to catch these shows, they go out Wednesdays and Sundays at 11. They are nearly always live, very occasionally recorded, and on a very rare occasions I actually miss a show. So if you do want to catch up at any time, the easiest way to do it is probably to go to my YouTube channel, Survival Skills UK, where of course you can find lots of other interesting videos, not just the back 11s. And Clive's looked in and said hello. Good morning to you too, Clive. Right, okay, moving on with the news. Now, EV manufacturers Ford, General Motors and Rivian have already adopted Tesla's North American Charging Standard, NACS. And at the end of last month, rather interestingly, Finnish electric motorcycle builder Verge Motorcycles officially announced plans to use Tesla's charging network, and they are the first motorcycle manufacturer to do so. Now, although energy density is much the same, of course, on batteries between cars and bikes, electric motorcycles have smaller batteries, and that means they have shorter ranges, so they do need more frequent top-ups. Now, Verge say that as they are about to prepare to enter the US market, whilst describing themselves rather optimistically as the Tesla of motorcycles, this decision seemed, quote, a natural solution for us. So the deal would give Verge access to 17,000 Tesla charging stations. Now, right now, it's they say that's good because the Verge is currently on the cusp of entry into the US market, and it gets the company ahead of Zero, Harley Davidson's Livewire brand, as well as the Italian moto manufacturer Energica, who are trying to build a performance long-range bike. Now, just one problem I can see, of course, or rather can't see, is that test bikes for the press apart. I haven't yet seen any evidence that Verge are yet delivering bikes to customers. Now, previously known as RMK, according to the press releases that Verge have been distributing, the final tests were supposed to be happening back in 2019, and the bike was supposed to go on sale originally in early 2020. Now, okay, lockdown obviously impacted things, but pre-orders were being taken from May that year. Now that date slipped, obviously, back in 2022. Production was due to begin in 1 to 2 months, and then it was claimed that series production was launching in November 2022 with the anticipated Verge TS, as well as announcing another model to go alongside that. By February this year, it was said Verge intended to have the Pro model in production first, with customer deliveries to start in May 2023. And that was the same month, of course, that Verge unveiled yet another version of the bike, this being the Mika Hakkinen Special Edition. Now, as far as I know, and I'm open to correction, everybody is still waiting for their bikes. And right now, I don't think Tesla drivers, fearing that they'll have to put up with even more competition for their chargers, have too much to worry about, at least not from Verge anyway. Right, okay, now, is it just me, or is it actually a fact that more and more bikes are being announced years before you can actually buy them? I've just talked, of course, about Verge there. Now, over the last 20 odd years, Buell have been through more relaunches and I've had hot dinners. But the latest incarnation said back in 2021 that they would have 10 new models in the pipeline ready for launching by 2024. Now that's going to be a pretty tall order, because just 2 bikes are available from the new Buell product line. Right now you can go and buy a touring bike and you can buy a hill climber. Sorry, that's the next 2 that are scheduled for release. You can get 2 at the moment. One is the Hammerhead sports bike. I can't remember what the other one is. I think it's a naked version of the Hammerhead. And that touring bike and a hill climber are scheduled for release fairly soon. And the latest to appear is the Buell Super Cruiser 1190, or I should say, of course, it has not appeared. There it is. A nice looking bike if you like that kind of thing. Let's zoom in on a little bit, give you a slightly better view. Now, given Eric Buell's obsession with sports bikes, it's a bit odd to see a cruiser in the lineup, but I guess that's where the US market is. It's said to fuse design and performance, and it's been created in partnership with Roland Sands Design, RSD. Now, right now, of course, the bike, although it's been seen on test rides, is only a proof of concept. So it was previewed at a VIP party at Roland Sands Design Shop in California. That was back in February. It was unveiled by Buell themselves on their own social media shortly afterwards. And this high-performance cruiser is based on the existing 175 horsepower, a 1190cc liquid-cooled, that's the Buell V Twin, and that is itself an evolution of the Rotax Helicon motor. Now, presumably to keep costs down and spare parts available, Sands was tasked with keeping as much of the standard Buell rolling chassis as possible. So the forks, the 17-inch wheels, the perimeter disc brake system up at the front, and the braking system itself are all standard. And what Sands has provided here is a lightweight one-off steel tube frame, not an alloy frame, a steel tube frame. And together, though, the parts tip the scales at a relatively featherweight 2004 kilograms or 450 pounds, which shows what you can do if you put your mind to weight saving. So the result, well, it's what's described as the fastest, coolest cruiser on the market. But don't get too hopeful of seeing one in the showroom just yet, even though the price is yet to be announced. They are on pre-order, but delivery is not expected till 2025. Good morning, Paul. Thank you for looking in. Nice to see you too. So, as we cross into the second half of the year, we get ever closer to the Northern Hemisphere's autumn bike shows, and as usual, the rumour mill is working flat out, anticipating just what bikes might have the covers pulled off them when the latest 2024 models are revealed. And some recent speculation revolves around Royal Enfield. Now, the Indian company has managed to establish its 350 singles and its 650 twin cylinder bikes on the international stage. They've been surprisingly well received, both of the new ranges, but they're probably close to the end of the number of variations they can squeeze out of either theme, though at least one more version of the 650 is expected to appear later this year. That's the bike. In it's the 650 Classic. It's been seen out road testing in sort of ready to run shape. It's shares the same styling cues as the existing 350 Classic, so you get that little shade on the headlight, for example, the teardrop tank, the pea-shooter exhausts, and spoked wheels, all making for a very traditional looking machine. I actually quite like it in a weird kind of way. There are rumours that the Royal Enfield will actually be updating the 650 Twin as 2, and of course there's still RE's first ever electric motorcycle to look forward to. That's definitely in development. But the latest buzz is that Royal Enfield are actually working on a new project. It's apparently got the code name R, and this will be based around a new 750cc twin motor, and this new bike is said to be under development at the company's UK-based research and development centre, which is in Leicester. Now, whether this will be a bigger version of the existing 650 or a completely new design isn't known, neither is what bikes will roll off the production line when they do appear, though some sources say the first will be a bobber and it will be ready for the 2025 model lineup, and this apparently has the code name R2G. Now, with Triumph and Harley-Davidson launching models that pitch themselves at the 400 competitors, as to the Royal Enfield's own 350cc range, something that's actually impacted the parent company Eicher Motors share price, it wouldn't be entirely surprising if the Indian company returns the compliments by attempting to grab a slice of the bigger engine pie. So the engines, as I say, are said to be in development now, with an eye mainly on the North American and European markets. So comments, what my thinking on this? Well, first of all, the existing motor is bang on the A2 license limit, 35 kilowatts, 47 horsepower, and as such, as a 650, it's probably understressed. So my guess is that with a bore and stroke of 78mm and 67.8mm, it's somewhat over square, and I suspect it wouldn't be too difficult a job to open out the bores a little, slip a slightly bigger piston in, and find a extra 50 cc's per cylinder. Now, interestingly, the rumour mill originally reported that the 650 twin would be a 750. So, what happens if Royal Enfield squeeze another 15 horsepower out of the motor? Well, basically, they have a lighter competitor for the rather porky 900cc 64 horsepower Bonneville T100. That bike's over 500 pounds in weight, fueled up. Whatever happened to the concept of a lightweight twin-cylinder engine? The Buell we just talked about shows you what can be done. Now, the Interceptor 650 is incredibly well priced at £6,000 here in the UK at the moment, whilst Triumph are asking a fairly eye-watering £9,600 for their T100. That's the least expensive of their twins, and that leaves quite a lot of room for Royal Enfield to bring in a 750 that undercuts Triumph in price as well as weight. That's my guess. Now, on with the next piece of news about motorcycles. Depending on your point of view, switching from a conventional internal combustion engine motor to electricity is either liberating from the design point of view, allowing designers come up with innovative new ways of putting motorcycles together, or it's creating a bunch of camels. Now, camels, you'll probably remember, were once famously described as a horse designed by a committee, and frankly, many of the current crop of e-bikes demonstrate, to me at least, the weaknesses of incorporating too many conflicted, often overly idealistic, and often, I would say, inexperienced opinions into a design project, which makes many of them of questionable value to the end user. So take a look at this one. This is BMW's CE02. Just square that up in the frame a bit. There we go, there it is. It's, I would say, distinctly more camel than iron horse, and in fact the company themselves admit it. They say it's electric and it's designed to appeal to young people, and it's neither an e-motorbike nor an e-scooter. In fact, they described the bike as an e-parkourer. Now, parkour is the rather strange urban sport of getting from one place to another by vaulting, jumping or climbing over obstacles. I found that definition online somewhere, rather than simply walking around them and taking the easy way. And you know, frankly, the biggest obstacle this bike is going to vault is going to be a curb. Now, secondly, it's described as having unusual proportions and striking graphics. Well, I can't see anything striking about the graphics on that. Unusually proportioned, well, it's got a wheel at one end, wheel at the other end, and the motor and the battery in the middle. That's pretty much what you have to do. And then the handlebars have to be somewhere you can reach them from the seat, and ditto the pedals, the peg. So, you know, really, it's not unusual at all, is it? But that's what the head of BMW Motorrad Design, one Edgar Heinrich, by the way, he said. He claimed it's an uncomplicated, youthful form of single-track mobility, and that the reduced design language stands for lightness and fun. Or you could put it another way, it just looks unfinished. It certainly... he says the focus is not on utility but on emotional appeal, riding pleasure and uncomplicated, almost intuitive use. Well, it certainly lacks utility. You don't get any lockable storage where the petrol tank would have been on a conventional bike. You don't even get a rack. In short, there is nowhere to stash a bag. Neither is there any passenger accommodation, and in fact you would have to order the special edition with the gold forks to get something as basic as a phone holder. So what else can we say about it? Well, riding pleasure probably explains why this bike has a claimed maximum range of just 56 miles or 90 kilometres. Take a look at that seat. Most modern motorcycle seats have evolved into their conventional shape because they offer a mixture of comfort and control over the machine. And the tank has been retained on many electric bikes for exactly the same reasons. They help the rider control the machine. The CEO2, you get a flat plank to sit on, but rather than make it a step through, you get that weird styling feature which kind of mimics the shape of a tank without actually being of any use whatsoever. So that makes that impossible. The bike gets a 125 equivalent 11 horsepower 11 kilowatt rather peak rated motor. That pushes it to a top speed of just under 60, say BMW, but with a pair of batteries storing just 3.92 kilowatt hours of power. Twisting the throttle, you'll probably be glad to know that at least has a throttle rather than some other weird and intuitive way of accelerating the machine. Hard riding will almost certainly drop that well below the claimed maximum range. My guess is if you commute into a city on fast roads, you'll be needing a recharge in 20 to 25 miles per hour. So that's not utility either. It's going to need some careful planning if your commute isn't just a couple of miles on slow roads each way. If you do need a top up, there's another cost saving measure that will hit you now, because when you can park up and recharge all day at work, a level 1 charger, which isn't integrated into the bike incidentally, it will deliver your 20 to 80 charge time in around 2.8 hours. But even if you plug in the optional fast charger, when I say fast, it's a 1.5 kilowatt charger, you're still looking at 2.3 hours for that charge time. So you knock about 25 minutes off. So empty to full, expect 5 hours or so. So this really isn't a nip into town, top up while doing a spot of shopping bike, because you're not going to be able to top it up quickly, and you're not going to be able to carry anything on it. What else? Well, you get weird sort of disc style 14-inch wheels. You can't see those particularly well in the photo, but there's kind of a hole punched through the middle. My first thought looking at those was they'll be fun in a side wind. You do get belt drive. You get a single-sided rear swing arm. You get the inverted front fork with adjustable levers, wow, on both of the bars. The report says there's ABS on the front wheel rather than both. ABS on the rear wheels, well, ABS is not a mandatory requirement for a 125 equivalent machine, hence why they fitted it as a cost-saving measure to the front wheel only. You do get a keyless start and reverse gear though, and a 3.5-inch TFT, but that does connect with the BMW Motorrad app, and you get a single USB-C port for charging. 3 riding modes, as if you really need them, with 11 kilowatts to play with. Those are optional extras apparently anyway. Flow for urban traffic, surf for cruising, and flash for sportier rides. But it is reasonably light, I guess. It's 132 kilograms, 290 pounds, much the same as my fueled up 250 Honda from 1980, but that has a dual seat. It goes 180 miles on a tank, and it cruises happily at 60 miles per hour with somebody else on the back of it. So if the full power CEO2 is too fast for you, you can get a lower powered version limited to just 28 miles per hour. That's classed as a moped, but it only gets one battery, so no longer range. Brace yourself for the camel shaped price. $7,599 has been announced in the States. No price in the UK yet, but if you've done the usual pound to dollar conversion, you're probably looking at least £7,000. So my guess is that the sales on this bike are probably going to be doing something like this, flatlining. What do you think? Let me know. I'll be fascinated to hear whether you agree with me or not on my analysis of that particular bike, but I have to say I don't think very much of it. Right, which brings me finally to today's main discussion point. Now, this is going to be a reasonably long one, but the question is there any evidence for more effective day riding light patterns? Now, you'll recall, if you've been following me on the last couple of shows, that what I've been looking at was a collision which involved a woman pulling out of a junction in front of a motorcycle. Motorcyclist was seriously injured. Driver was convicted of dangerous driving. Now, the Defence Counsel suggested that there was a school of thought that two lights on a motorcycle were better than one. So there we have a motorcycle with two lights on. I actually pinched that one from a TfL document. Now, I looked at my own research, looked at the background material that I've collected over the years for any evidence that suggested that two lights might be easier to see, and I concluded there was little evidence to support his claim. As far as I can see, the argument for improved conspicuity with two headlights rather than one is based on a paper from 1990 entitled Research into Motorcycle Conspicuity and its Implementation by one G.L. Don, who suggested that there was a small reduction in collision numbers involving bikes with two headlights rather than a single light. But the fact is there are plenty of conflicting studies, and most importantly that study is 30 years old and things have changed. I've picked a reasonably old motorcycle there for the photograph, but even that one's a bit younger than 30 years old. And looking at the papers, frankly, one thing I found is that for every paper supporting a particular position on day riding lights, there's another one that is questioning it. Now, the first thing I would say is that whether DRLs are likely to be effective is complicated by two fairly fundamental issues which are rarely considered as important questions. And it's bizarre really, because here's the first. Sometimes we're riding in daylight, sometimes we're riding at night. Lights which help us see in the dark are tackling a very different problem from lights which help others to see us during daytime. Now, not surprisingly, lights which perform one task well aren't particularly good at the other. And here's the second. What are we trying to design the lights to do? Are we trying to design those lights to help us stand out in traffic amongst other vehicles, or are the lights there to give drivers who've already seen us better sense of our speed, our distance, and the all-important time to collision calculation? These are very, very different requirements, and you've probably guessed. The lights which perform one task well don't seem to be particularly good at the other. So it should be even less surprising that if we try to compromise all these functions into one single light setup to try to do all four tasks simultaneously, we end up with a light which probably doesn't do any of the jobs very well. And frankly, manufacturers with headlights focus on the seeing where you're going aspect of those lights. So I'm not going to discuss the issues being identified at night. That's another problem altogether. So here's the first observation I'll make. Standard low beam, or dipped headlights as some people call them, are poor performers as lights when used in daytime riding. Now, one of the biggest issues with a lot of research papers which are quoted to support day riding lights are that they are old. the Don paper I just mentioned above, over 30 years old. Now, as I said last week, there are hundreds of studies into day riding lights, and many of the early ones that supported the use of DRLs, what they actually did was they used poor, well, I consider at least to be poor quality investigative methods. Some of the earliest, for example, showed people photos of bikes with lights on and other bikes with lights off, and asked which were the easiest to see. Fairly simple to see what answer that one came up with. Others flashed up photographs of bikes with different lighting configurations for a few milliseconds, and they asked participants to record which vehicles they'd seen. And here's one photo which I have pinched from a study into the triangle of lights. Now, it is fuzzy, and that's because it was lifted from a printed PDF. But notice, I would say two things. Forget the fuzziness. Notice, first of all, how everything is in shades of grey. The colour contrast in those pictures has been removed, deliberately removed, to make them as close to sort of black and white as you possibly can get. And secondly, have a look at the light that's being emitted from the lenses. Have you ever seen headlights shining like that? No, I haven't either. And thirdly, have a look at the picture down in the bottom left, which features a motorcycle supposedly with a yellow headlight. It's all photoshopped, it's all totally unrealistic. Nothing about that is relevant to the road. So here are some real life bikes. This is what they look like in real life. It's a totally different scene. There's colour, there's vibrancy, and look at those lights. You don't get that sort of fuzzy glowing ball effect. Yes, there's a sort of lighter patch where the headlight is, but it's a very, very different kind of look. So my contention is that those studies which fiddled with the background and foreground to try to emphasize certain points, they simply don't replicate what is likely to happen on the road. And I don't think we can place any reliance on those results, except to say more work needed. And in fact, more recent studies with high fidelity simulators where people encounter motorcycles using different lighting patterns as realistically as possible within the laboratory conditions, they have begun to reduce some different test results. Now, another recent study noted, as I talked about last week, that currently most daytime running lights on motorcycles are low beam headlights, and their results suggested low beams do not significantly reduce the number of crashes, particularly on bright days. And they concluded that the lights are actually more effective on cloudy days and near dawn and dusk, which is perhaps what we might expect intuitively. They also found that low beams are ineffective at highway speeds and greater, which again, the light pattern that I talked about last week, that would be entirely consistent with the fact that the light is directed down away from the observer's eyes. Now, there is always some light escaping from the lens. It's never perfect, but as you can see, none of those lights on those bikes is particularly bright. So, the better headlights are likely to get, by the way, the more focused they are, the less they become useful as day running lights. Did I actually get those photos up for you? I think I might have actually been talking away merrily and not even actually put the photos up. So those are the two photos. This is the first one. Notice the sort of the greyed out backgrounds, the greyed out colours, and look at the strange fuzzy lights on the bikes and that weird yellow light on the one bottom left. That's what I was talking about. And here's the other one. This is the vibrant, brightly coloured background scene with the bikes standing out rather differently because of their colours, and the headlights being completely different from those sort of fuzzy things we just talked about. And Kevin's just said no pics. Yes, so there we go. Hopefully you've now seen the pics. I'm not quite sure why I blanked those out, but anyway, there we go. So what to do? Well, on faster roads, one situation when dip beams are ineffective, there is some evidence that the triangle of lights, as the beloved of BMW riders, does enhance a driver's ability to perceive your speed and distance and thus calculate the time to collision more accurately. On the other hand, the triangle doesn't seem to be successful at preventing collisions in urban areas, presumably because the lights don't stand out in the crowd, as it were. They're just more lights. And one fairly recent paper from 2015, it's called A Different Perspective on Conspicuity-Related Motorcycle Crashes, and it's by authors from a Netherlands-based road safety research institute, if you're interested. They concluded, quote, "In our opinion, these studies do not provide conclusive evidence of an enhancing effect of the T-shaped light configuration for motorcyclists yet," unquote. So what about the very unusual lighting patterns that many riders sort of slap onto their motorcycles and are being increasingly promoted by road safety bodies? Well, the problem is that they run the risk of not being recognised as a motorcycle, and then you end up with the WTF is that hesitation and freezing whilst drivers try to work out what in fact the unidentified flying object heading towards them actually is. Now, where there is some increasing positive evidence, it's for the effectiveness of yellow daytime running lights, and they do help a motorcycle stand out in traffic, but they also appear to help with identifying a bike at dusk or in the rain. So what would I do? Well, at the very least, I would suggest that changing the headlight, one or both perhaps, to yellow with a simple Perspex headlight cover. It's a highly effective or highly cost-effective measure anyway. The cover can of course be removed for nighttime use, and that's in fact what I use. You could always do a bulb swap too, but that will reduce light output at night. Yellow lights are legal in the UK. They're not legal fitted to a brand new vehicle, but you can change it. Australia, I know yellow lights are not legal, so you'll have to do something else there. Okay, so assuming that you can use yellow lights, why not create yourself your yellow triangle of lights? Here you have something here. If you've got electrical skills that are up to the job, you have somewhere to mount them, you can fit lights like these on these two bikes. Now, just make sure that they are wide angle, so in other words, they shine away from your direct line of path, because that's the only way you're going to attract people's attention who are sitting out of the direct line of your bike. And make sure that they are not lights set on stun. If they dazzle, they simply blind everybody to what's actually behind the lights, and that of course is you. Now, always on turn signals are another option, and they're one that a lot of people are starting to promote now because they have got some positive thumbs up in tests. But again, what I would say is that we're not used to that setup here in the UK, so I'd say there is a risk of confusion. If someone glances your way and sees your left indicator apparently on, are they going to pull out in front of you because they've mistaken your always on day running light, which is amber, and where the turn signal is? So I would not think about always on turn signals. I would think about separating the lights spatially. So what about the very latest bikes, like the ones in the photo actually, which are coming with LED day running lights? So there we go, that's the sort of thing that we're seeing. Well, are they working? Well, as far as I know, nobody has actually yet tested any of the lighting systems which are actually in use on the roads. Right, so to wind up from that, how worried should we be about drivers not seeing motorcycles at junctions? Well, yes, we need to be concerned that these are the most common collisions in urban areas, when a driver either from the opposite direction turns across our path or from the junction alongside us pulls out into our path. But statistically, we're not at a great risk of having a smidgy collision. The current UK figures are somewhere around 100 fatalities and 1,000 serious injuries from collisions at junctions, but that's within the entire riding population, 1.3 million riders. Even if you threw in another 10,000 minor injuries and say 100,000 genuine near misses, and those are figures I don't think anybody's ever counted, that's still 1,202,000 180,000 riders who won't have an incident every year. So, you know, the chances of actually being caught out are pretty low. But whatever steps you take, don't place too much faith in the myth, I have my lights on, drivers will see me, because it is a myth. Now, out on the road, the claims for DRLs really don't hold up when we look at actual crashes, and this is really the key point, isn't it? Because if they might work in a laboratory, they might work in a study, in a simulator, but what happens out on the road? Well, simply put, if DRLs really worked, we would have seen a dramatic reduction in the number of collisions that happen at junctions as soon as bikes came with always on lights, and it's simply not happened. Now, the Motorcycle Accident In-Depth Study, the pan-European accident study, it found that about 37% of all crashes involving a motorcycle, so that's every crash that happens to a motorcyclist, around 37% of those, so just over 1 in 3, is linked to the failure of the driver of another vehicle to perceive the motorcycle. Now, UK studies suggest that the figure rises to around 2 in 3 of all collisions when we involve another vehicle in the crash. So in roughly, if there's 2 vehicles involved, and one being the motorcycle, 2/3 of those happen because the driver of the other vehicle didn't see the motorcycle. Now, the MATES study also found that around 2/3 of the motorcyclists involved in crashes had their lights on at the time of the collision. We don't know the proportion that had lights on, didn't have lights on in the crashes which involved other vehicles. We don't have that data, but clearly some of them at least must have done. And in fact, when you do look at some of the very few studies that have tried to look for before and after figures, for example, where there's been a law change which involves switching headlights on one day when you didn't need to the previous day, the evidence suggests that from these real life studies is that the reduction in the accident rate thanks to these lights is 5 to 10%. Even the most optimistic paper I found only proposed a collision risk reduction of 20%, or to put it another way, if 10 riders are unlucky enough to end up in a crash risk situation, 8 would still crash. Only 2 would the lights stop the driver in their tracks. So frankly, how are we going to work on this? Well, the answer is simple. We get far more benefit from being alert and ready to take evasive action personally than we do from relying on another road user. Right, so that is it for today. Just one comment there from Kevin. He saw a GS with amber running lights, very visible. Yes, okay, but don't forget you are also primed for salience. That is something jumping out of the background at you because of your semantic interest. You are pre-primed to see other motorcycles because you like motorcycles. You have to remember that this is a very powerful effect, and what we see as working to help make other motorcycles conspicuous doesn't necessarily work when you're thinking about a driver who has no interest in in motorcycles. There's some work done on this by Professor, what's his name, David Eagleman. Go and have a look at his stuff, and one of the things he talks about is how that if you get 2 people with different interests looking at the same scene, they will see the scene and describe it to you in totally different ways. They will pick out details that the one expert will pick out details that the expert in the other field won't, and vice versa. So the trouble is, what we see with our own eyes as we ride as motorcyclists, that is not a reliable guide in any way, shape or form to what other people see of us. And this is one of the biggest problems with road safety, is because the people who promote these things are road safety experts, and what they want to see is bikes that they think look nice and bright, so they will tell you what they see. It may have no connection, it probably doesn't have any connection at all with what the average road user sees. So yeah, consider what you're doing with your lights very, very carefully indeed. Don't just copycat other people and think, that's it, bingo, now everybody can see me. It simply doesn't work that way. Right, okay, as I say, that's Any comments, questions, do drop me a line. I'm always interested to hear. I think that pretty much concludes my look into the results of that trial. I think it's thrown up some very interesting points that we as motorcyclists do need to consider. And I think I have whittled on long enough today, so that is it for the end of the show. If you are out there on the bike today, remember to keep an eye on the weather. It is up and down for the next few days, but if you're enjoying the sun where the sun's shining, please stay shiny side up. Thank you once again for looking in. This has been Elevenses, and I've been Kevin Williams of Survival Skills Rider Training. Thanks for watching.